I'm joined in the studio today by one of our fellows for the Center for African Management and Markets, Ronak Gopaldas, and he's also the Director of Signal Risk. You're welcome, Ronak.
Thanks for having me.
You deal in a very important area that has to do with risk and politics and economics on the continent. Do you mind telling us more about what you do?
I focus on the intersection of politics and economics and translating that into what it means for commercial decision makers. So looking at the so what, because everybody's got Google, everybody's got information at their fingertips, but translating this into a meaningful piece of information with which you can make decisions is often the difficult piece. So we take really complex information and we try and simplify it in such a way that it's digestible, easy to understand, and it helps to react to events and also to anticipate things.
That's pretty interesting, because if you think about the election event, on the continent, we've got about 20 African countries going into elections this year. From your expertise and based on what you know, what is the implication of that on local businesses and even more importantly, on intra-African businesses?
When you think about elections in Africa, generally there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty around what they're going to bring. Is there going to be fiscal slippage? Is there going to be an impact on the currency? Is there going to be corruption? Is there going to be violence? Those generally were the questions that people and investors would have in the run-up to elections. Now you've got a whole different set of dynamics. Are there going to be internet shutdowns? Is one very clear case in point. And as the past couple of years have shown us that surprises are starting to become the norm. So in Kenya, the election result was annulled. In the DRC, an election was manipulated in favor of an opposition candidate, which is something completely new in an African context. Smooth transitions of power and straightforward transitions of power in Angola and Botswana haven't been all that straightforward. So, what I'm learning is that there's no such thing as a straightforward African election anymore. And the big issue when you're looking at elections in Africa is around certainty. Investors kind of don't want a lot of disruption. They don't want a protracted and elongated affair. They want the thing to be done and dusted so that they can get on with investing and doing business in a stable and predictable environment.
If we talk about the two largest economies on the continent, so they're part of the countries who are going into elections this year. So we're talking South Africa and Nigeria, which has just recently concluded theirs. If I was thinking of investing in any of these countries from Africa, what would be the one thing you think I should be cautious about, or what would be the one thing I should focus on?
If you're going to be a Pan-African player, you can't ignore Nigeria and South Africa. They're two very, very important economies, but they've been performing at subpar levels for the better part of the last 5 years. Nigeria, the big question marks around the regulatory policy, around policy predictability, around how business friendly the current administration is. All investors really want is for a stable and predictable regulatory environment. And that hasn't been the case. If you look at kind of incidents with MTN, a few of the oil companies, a few of the telcos, and other international businesses. So, that's kind of the first factor. And then in the Nigerian context, the currency and liquidity issues, as well as the security issues have been a key area to watch. In South Africa, we've had a new president that's come through last year. He's been in power for around about a year, but the honeymoon is well and truly over. And now we go to the polls to see what kind of mandate he's going to get. Again, there's a lot of talk about a reform agenda, but the president at the moment hasn't really consolidated both internally within his party, and now he needs to get a mandate from the electorate. So I think this is kind of pretty crucial in determining the direction in which South Africa is going to go, and how assertive the president can be in this reform agenda. So, in both countries, I think the message is quite clear that, you've been performing at suboptimal economic levels. Policy predictability, uncertainty, and more investor-friendly climate is what investors want to see.
Do you think there's a role for digital democracy? If we talk about South Africa, first of all, is there any role that digital democracy can play?
Yeah, so let's rewind a little bit. When Egypt and Tunisia, the revolutions happened over there, digital democracy, Facebook, social media was seen to be a force of good. It was seen to bring the electorates closer to alienated politicians or people who kind of were very distant from them. This culture of accountability, it was meant to kind of to improve governance. But now what we found is that in fact, social media and fake news and propaganda is being used to kind of exploit divisions and to create greater polarization. And what's happening then is that we're seeing societies becoming more fractured. So you've got a very kind of almost binary tension between this digital democracy and a force of good and digital dictatorship, which is being used to pull societies apart. And how this tension is going to be reconciled, as mobile proliferation and access to social media and the internet becomes more prevalent, is going to be interesting. In January alone, we had 5 countries shut down the internet in Africa. Is this the start of a trend? Is it going to be circumvented? How are populations, especially young populations, going to react to this? These are all questions that we're going to need to answer over the coming days, months, and years.
Thank you very much. This has been very handy insights, and it's nice to have you share them with us.